This week, the crypto market barely moved on the surface. But underneath, something interesting was brewing. Bitcoin ended almost perfectly flat, while Ethereum quietly outpaced it, and one trending token tied to real-world assets is signaling where the smart money may be heading next. Let's break down exactly what happened. Welcome to your Aurelian Wealth Weekly Recap for the week ending July 17th, 2026. This was a week of consolidation more than conviction. Bitcoin closed at $64.27, up just 0% over the 7-day period, essentially flat. Ethereum was the brightest spot among the majors, gaining plus 3.0% to reach $1,842.74. BNB lagged, dropping 1.3% to $565.77, while stablecoins Tether and USDC held their pegs at $1 with virtually no movement. The overall tone was neutral to slightly bullish. With Bitcoin treading water and Ethereum outperforming, we saw a modest rotation of capital into altcoins and select ecosystem plays. Bitcoin dominance likely ticked slightly lower as ETH, and trending tokens absorbed marginal inflows. This kind of week, low volatility, sideways majors, and rising interest in narrative-driven coins often precedes a larger move in either direction. Traders spent the week positioning rather than chasing. It wasn't a euphoric week, nor a fearful one. Instead, it was the calm accumulation phase that seasoned investors watch carefully. Let's dig into the details, starting with Bitcoin. Bitcoin was the definition of stability this week, closing at $64.27 with a 7-day change of just 4% and a 24-hour move of pleasure. That's about as flat as it gets. Price action stayed tightly range-bound, with BTC oscillating in a narrow band as buyers and sellers reached a temporary equilibrium. There were no dramatic breakouts or breakdowns. Instead, Bitcoin coiled, building energy near a key psychological zone. What drove this? A lack of major macro catalysts. With no surprise regulatory shocks and a quiet Fed calendar, traders had little reason to reprice risk aggressively. Volume was muted, reflecting a market waiting for its next signal. Historically, extended periods of low volatility for Bitcoin resolve with a sharp expansion move, so this compression is worth monitoring closely. Bulls will point to the fact that BTC held its ground despite altcoin rotation drawing attention elsewhere. Bears will note the lack of upward momentum. The takeaway: Bitcoin remains firmly in accumulation mode. The $64,000 level is now the pivot to watch heading into next week's session. Ethereum was the star of the majors this week, climbing plus 3.0% over 7 days to close at $1,842.74, even though it dipped 1.3% in the last 24 hours. That weekly outperformance against a flat Bitcoin tells us capital is beginning to favor the ETH ecosystem again. The story here is layered. Staking activity remained robust, with validators continuing to lock ETH and reduce liquid supply. Layer 2 networks kept posting strong throughput numbers, driving demand for block space and reinforcing Ethereum's role as the settlement backbone of DeFi. The biggest theme, though, was the growing tokenization narrative, with real-world assets increasingly settling on Ethereum and its roll-ups. This ties directly into the Ondo momentum we're seeing in the trending list. The late-week 24-hour pullback of 1.3% simply looks like healthy profit-taking after a strong run, not a trend reversal. As long as ETH holds above key support and continues outpacing Bitcoin, the case for continued ecosystem strength stays intact. Ethereum's relative strength is one of the more encouraging signals from this otherwise quiet week. With Bitcoin flat, the spotlight shifted to altcoins, and the trending list tells the real story this week. Ondo led the narrative charge, riding the surging interest in real-world asset tokenization. As institutions look for compliant, on-chain exposure to treasuries and yield-bearing instruments, Ondo has positioned itself at the center of that thesis, and traders rewarded it with renewed attention. Ondo also trended strongly, capturing speculative interest in the gaming and Web3 entertainment vertical, a sector that tends to attract fast momentum plays. CashCat rounded out the trending trio, representing the ever-present appetite for community-driven, meme-adjacent tokens that can deliver outsized short-term moves. Among the majors, Ethereum's plus 3.0% weekly gain qualified it as an outperformer relative to Bitcoin's plus 0.1%. The key question is sustainability. Narrative-driven tokens like Ondo have genuine fundamental tailwinds, making their moves potentially more durable. Meme-style plays like CashCat, however, can reverse just as quickly as they rise. The rotation pattern, money flowing from stagnant majors into thematic altcoins, is classic mid-cycle behavior. Manage position sizing accordingly and never chase parabolic candles. Not everything moved higher this week. Among the majors we track, BNB was the clear underperformer, sliding 1.3% over the 7-day period and 1.5% in the last 24 hours to close at 565.77. That's a modest decline in absolute terms, but it stands out against Ethereum's plus 3.0% gain and Bitcoin's flat performance. Why the weakness? BNB largely lacked fresh catalysts this week, and with capital rotating toward the real-world asset and gaming narratives dominating the trending list, exchange-linked tokens simply didn't get the attention. The 24-hour drop of 1.5% suggests some late-week profit-taking and a lack of buy-side conviction rather than any structural breakdown. It's important to keep perspective. A low single-digit decline in a sideways week is noise, not a crisis. There were no major hacks, exploits, or negative headlines driving BNB lower. It was mostly rotation and apathy. The lesson for traders is that in a range-bound market, relative strength matters enormously. Coins without a live narrative tend to bleed slowly as attention and liquidity flow elsewhere. Watch whether BNB reclaims momentum or continues drifting next week. On the news front, this was a relatively quiet week for market-moving headlines, which helps explain the sideways price action. The dominant theme remained the accelerating real-world asset tokenization trend, and Ondo's presence in the trending list reflects growing institutional and retail interest in bringing treasuries, bonds, and yield products on-chain. This narrative continues to attract serious capital and could define the next leg of adoption. On the regulatory side, markets saw no major shocks, no surprise enforcement actions, and no dramatic policy shifts, which allowed traders to breathe and reposition without fear. Stablecoins USDT and USDC both held their 1.0 pegs perfectly, underscoring the maturity and stability of the current market infrastructure. In the Web3 gaming space, Ondo's trending status hints at renewed developer and user activity in blockchain gaming. Meanwhile, the absence of any high-profile hacks or exploits this week was itself good news, signaling improving security practices across major protocols. Overall, the news cycle was calm and constructive. Sometimes no news truly is good news. It lets fundamentals and narratives quietly compound in the background. The DeFi and NFT corners of the market mirrored the broader week's tone, steady and narrative-driven. On the DeFi side, total value locked stayed resilient, buoyed by Ethereum's ecosystem strength and its plus 3.0% weekly gain. The standout theme continues to be real-world assets, with protocols like Ondo channeling capital into tokenized treasuries and yield-bearing products. This is arguably the most important structural trend in DeFi right now, blurring the line between traditional finance and on-chain markets. Layer 2 activity remained healthy, keeping transaction costs manageable and supporting continued DeFi engagement. In the NFT and Web3 gaming space, Ondo's trending momentum signals renewed interest in play-to-earn and gaming economies, a sector that has been rebuilding quietly after its earlier hype cycle. Meme-adjacent culture also stayed alive, with Cash Cat capturing the community-driven speculative energy that never fully disappears from crypto. The emerging trend to watch is the convergence of DeFi utility with real-world value, moving beyond pure speculation toward genuine financial applications. For long-term believers in Web3, this week reinforced that the infrastructure is maturing steadily, even during periods of muted price action. Looking ahead, several factors could shape next week's market. First, watch Bitcoin's tight range around $64,27. After this compression, a decisive break above or below could set the tone for weeks to come. Volatility this low rarely lasts. Second, keep an eye on Ethereum, which at 118 and 42.74 has shown relative strength. A continued outperformance versus Bitcoin would confirm the altcoin rotation thesis. Third, monitor the trending narratives. Ondo and the real-world asset story could see further momentum if institutional adoption headlines emerge, while Aikido and Cash Cat carry higher speculative risk. On the macro front, any surprise from the Fed calendar or unexpected regulatory news remains the biggest wildcard. Token unlocks across various projects could also introduce sell pressure, so check the schedules for coins you hold. Key technical levels to watch: BTC holding $64,000 as support and ETH defending above its recent range. Risk management is everything in a low volatility environment that can flip quickly. As always, nothing in this video is financial advice. This is educational content only. Always do your own research and never invest more than you can afford to lose. So what did this week teach us? First, that flat markets are not dead markets. Bitcoin's plus 0.1% weekly move might look boring, but consolidation is where positioning happens and where the next trend is built. Patience is a genuine edge. Second, relative strength matters. Ethereum's plus 3.0% gain against a stagnant Bitcoin and a declining BNB showed that even in quiet weeks, capital flows toward assets with active narratives. Following the money, not the noise, is a repeatable strategy. Third, narratives drive attention. The trending presence of Ondo, Aikido, and Cash Cat reminds us that themes like real-world assets, gaming, and community tokens can outperform even when majors stall. But sustainability varies wildly. Fundamental narratives like RWA tend to last, while meme momentum can vanish overnight. The common mistake this week was chasing pumps late without a plan. What worked was disciplined accumulation and watching for rotation signals. The actionable insight: in low volatility environments, focus on relative strength, protect your capital, and prepare for the eventual volatility expansion rather than forcing trades in a quiet tape. That's a wrap on this week's crypto recap from Aurelian Wealth. If you found this breakdown useful, smash that like button and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss next week's roundup. Drop your predictions for next week in the comments. Will Bitcoin break out of its range, and can Ethereum keep leading? Let's discuss below.